hidden for 61 years. That was what the county records said, though they used different words: tax delinquent, unclaimed, no registered heir. Eleanor Voss read those words 3 times at the kitchen table of her daughter's house in Portland, Maine, where she had been sleeping in the guest room for 11 weeks, and where the walls were painted a color her daughter called greige, and Eleanor called nothing at all, because she had stopped having opinions about rooms she didn't own. The Cliff Cottage on Harrow Point had been listed at $9,000. The listing had a single photograph: gray shingles, a door, the color of old copper, and behind it the Atlantic, on a day when the sea was the same color as the sky and you couldn't quite tell where one ended and the other began. Eleanor had found the listing because of a poem. Her late husband Arthur had kept a notebook of poems he'd memorized, not his own, other people's, the ones that had stayed with him. After he died, Eleanor had read through it slowly over the course of several months, the way you eat something precious. In the margin beside a Robert Frost poem she had read many times before, Arthur had written in pencil, in handwriting smaller than his usual, "Harrow Point. Ask E someday." I never did. She had asked no one. She had looked it up instead. Beside her on the kitchen floor, Sage lifted his black and tan head from his forepaws. His triangular ears swiveled forward, both of them simultaneously, and he looked at the laptop screen the way he sometimes looked at things he could smell through walls. "I know," Eleanor said. "I'm thinking." Sage stood up, walked to the door, and sat down facing it. The guest room in Carol's house had been offered kindly and accepted with gratitude, and it was only after 6 weeks that Eleanor began to understand the difference between a room offered out of love and a room offered out of a sense of obligation that looked, from the outside, exactly like love. The house Eleanor had lived in for 43 years, the one she and Arthur had bought when Carol was 2 years old, with the elm tree in the front yard and the kitchen window that looked out over the garden, had been sold 4 months after Arthur's death. Carol had arranged it. Carol had said, "The upkeep is too much for you. The market is good right now. I'll handle everything. Don't worry." Eleanor had not worried. She had trusted her daughter the way she had trusted Arthur, completely, without inventory. She understood the difference between those two kinds of trust now. The sale had gone through while Eleanor was visiting a friend in Vermont. She came home to a house that was already being emptied. Carol stood in the kitchen directing 2 men with a moving truck, holding a clipboard, wearing the expression she wore when she was managing something. Focused, efficient, not quite meeting Eleanor's eyes. "The buyers want to close next week," Carol said. "I got you a good price. Where does the money go?" Eleanor asked. "Into the estate account. We'll sort it out properly once probate clears." Probate had cleared 8 months ago. The estate account had not been sorted. Every time Eleanor asked, Carol said, "Or the accountant is working on it," or "I don't want you to have to worry about this." Eleanor had stopped asking. Sage, who had been in the back of Carol's car during that first conversation, had pressed his long muzzle against the car window and watched Carol with his dark eyes without blinking. She found Arthur's notebook in the 3rd week at Carol's house, in a box of things that had been marked "Arthur's study," "Keep" in Carol's handwriting. The question mark had bothered Eleanor then. It bothered her more now. She read the notebook cover to cover over 3 evenings. She read the Frost poem 5 times. She read Arthur's marginal note, "Harrow Point. Ask E someday." I never did, and sat with it for a long time. Ask E, not her, someone else. Someone Arthur had meant to ask and hadn't. She looked up Harrow Point on Carol's laptop while Carol was at work. Found the county records. Found the listing. Sat in the Greige guest room for 20 minutes, looking at a $9,000 cliff cottage on the Maine coast. Sage came and pressed his nose against her knee. When she didn't move, he pushed his paw onto her foot. A deliberate pressure, not demanding, just present. She put her hand on his head. His ears, those precise triangular ears, angled back briefly at her touch, then forward again toward the screen. Eleanor called the county land office from Carol's driveway so she wouldn't be overheard. She made an appointment for the following Tuesday. She told no one. When she came back inside, Sage was waiting by the door with the particular stillness he used when he had already made a decision and was waiting for her to catch up. Harrow Point was a spit of land on the Downest coast, the kind of Maine that tourists didn't find because the roads leading to it were unmarked and the village at the end of them had a gas station, a lobster pound, and a war memorial, but no hotels. Eleanor drove up on a Tuesday in late November. The sky was the white-gray of early winter, the kind of flat light that makes distances hard to judge. The sea was loud before she could see it, a low continuous sound that she felt in her sternum before she identified it as waves. She stopped at the county assessor's satellite office, which was a counter at the back of the town hall, staffed by a woman named Doris, who found the Harrow Point file and then paused before she handed it over. You're not local, Doris said. No, my name is Eleanor Voss. My maiden name was Eleanor Marsh. Doris was quiet for a moment. She slid the file across the counter, and then, without being asked, she pulled a second, older file and laid it open beside the first. You'll want to see both, she said, and didn't explain. The cottage was at the end of a gravel path that ran along the cliff top, edged with dry seagrass that rattled in the wind. Stone foundation, gray shingle siding, a copper-colored door, one chimney. The attic window on the north face had a crack across it, mended long ago with a strip of lead. The sign above the door, half covered by an overgrown climbing rose that had gone woody and leafless in the cold, read, Marsh Point Keeper's Watch. Eleanor stopped walking. Sage had already reached the door. He stood with his forepaws on the single stone step, his black and tan coat stark against the gray of everything else, his nose pressed to the crack between door and frame. He inhaled slowly. Then he turned and looked at Eleanor with an expression that had no ambiguity in it at all. The inside of the cottage smelled of salt and cold and old wood, and faintly something that might have been tobacco, the ghost of someone who had smoked a pipe here years ago. The ceiling was low, the beams exposed and dark with age. The floor was wide plank pine, uneven under Eleanor's feet, whispering with every step. A fireplace on the west wall, stone cold, a wooden table, 2 chairs. A shelf with 3 books, their spines too faded to read. A hand-braided rug in blues and grays worn to the warp in the center. And above the fireplace, slightly off-center, a framed painting. Small, perhaps 12 inches by 16. A seascape. Harrow Point from the water, the cliff and the cottage at the top of it, rendered in careful particular detail. In the lower right corner of the painting, in small neat letters, EM 962, Eleanor Marsh. Her mother's initials, her own maiden initials. She stood in front of it for a long time. The painting was done by someone who knew this place, knew exactly where to stand in the water to see the cottage at that angle, knew which time of day gave that quality of light. Someone who had been here and had painted what they saw and had signed it with initials that were her mother's and had left it here. Sage had not stopped at the fireplace. He had gone straight to the narrow staircase at the back of the room, climbed 3 steps and stopped. The attic door at the top was padlocked, an old padlock, rusted, the hasp screwed into oak that had been painted over several times. Sage pressed his nose to the gap beneath the door. His ears went rigid. He looked back down at Eleanor, then up at the door, then back at Eleanor. Sage came back down the 3 steps, went to Eleanor, and pushed his muzzle firmly against her hand. Not gently, not tentatively, but with the deliberate insistence of a dog delivering important information. Then he went back up to the attic door and scratched at it twice with his right paw. Not frantic, measured. This. Here Eleanor climbed the stairs. The padlock was old, but the shackle was intact. She pulled on it, it held. She looked at the hasp, at the screws, at the painted-over wood around it. She went back down, found a flat stone near the fireplace that had probably been used as a doorstop, and used its edge to work at the screws in the hasp over the next 40 minutes. The wood was soft with age. The screws came out one at a time, badly stripped, reluctant, but they came. Sage sat at the bottom of the stairs and watched her work. He did not move, did not pace. When one screw finally pulled free and Eleanor made an involuntary sound of satisfaction, his tail swept the floor twice. Then stillness again. Keep going, the hasp swung free. Eleanor pushed the attic door open. The smell that came out was different. Drier, closed. The smell of a room that had been sealed against weather but not time. It was dim inside, light coming through the cracked north window in a narrow blade. She could see shapes, a trunk, a wooden crate, a rolled canvas or 2 leaning against the far wall. Sage pressed past her into the attic. He went directly to the rolled canvases, pressed his nose against them and sat. His tail swept the dusty floor in a slow arc. She heard the footsteps on the gravel path while she was still in the attic. Heavy, deliberate, the steps of someone who knew the path well. Eleanor came to the attic window and looked down. Man in his 80s, wool coat, flat cap, walking with a cane he clearly didn't need for balance, more habit than necessity. He stopped below and looked up at the attic window and saw Eleanor looking down. Thought I saw a car, he said in a voice accustomed to competing with the sea. Eleanor came downstairs and opened the door. Up close, the man had the face of someone who had spent most of his life outdoors and had not minded it. Bernard Cray, he said. I look after the path. Have done since 1974. He looked past Eleanor into the cottage, then at Sage, who had come to stand at Eleanor's side and was watching him with precise, unblinking attention. German Shepherd, Bernard said. Good dog for this kind of coast. They don't spook. Eleanor Voss, she said. Marsh, before I married. Something shifted in Bernard's face, not surprise exactly, but the recognition of something expected. Your mother painted that, he said, nodding toward the fireplace. I watched her do it. Summer of '62. She was here most of that summer. He paused and his voice dropped slightly. She asked me to keep the attic locked. Said someone would come for it eventually. He looked at Sage. Looks like eventually is today. What's in the attic? Eleanor said. Bernard looked at the sea for a moment before answering. I know some of it, he said carefully. Not all. There are things in there your mother didn't tell me, but she told me enough to know they matter. He met Eleanor's eyes. She said, when the right person comes, you'll know by the dog. The rolled canvases were oil paintings, 4 of them, wrapped in brown paper that had dried and cracked but held. Eleanor was careful unrolling them, working in the thin winter light from the cracked window. Sage beside her and Bernard at the attic door. The first 3 were seascapes, Harrow Point, the village harbor, the lighthouse at Sealhead. All signed EM, all dated between 1959 and 1963. The 4th was different. It was larger than the others and heavier, and when Eleanor got the brown paper off, she found not a painting but a frame, a deep shadowbox frame, with a painting inside and behind it, tucked between the canvas and the backing board, a sealed envelope. The painting itself showed the village of Harrow Point in winter, from above, as if seen from the cliff, precise, documentary. Every building in it rendered with care, including 3 buildings Eleanor did not recognize, larger than the others on the harbor's east side, in a position where a parking lot now stood. She worked at the frame's backing with her thumbnail. The wood was swollen and reluctant. Sage pressed his paw flat against the backing board from the other side, pushing toward her, holding it still while she worked the edges. When the backing finally gave, the envelope slid free and fell into Eleanor's lap. On the front, in her mother's handwriting, for Eleanor. The truth about Harrow Point and about us. She held the envelope for a moment in the dim attic light. Sage moved to her right side and pressed the length of his body against her arm, warm and steady. Bernard stood at the attic door with his hand on the frame and said nothing. Outside, the sea made its continuous sound. The cracked window let in a blade of cold air that smelled of salt. Eleanor turned the envelope over. The seal was intact. Her mother had pressed it closed and it had stayed closed for 61 years. She did not open it in the attic. She carried it downstairs, sat in one of the 2 chairs at the wooden table, and set it before her. Sage lay down with his chin on her right foot, his weight a solid anchor. Bernard came down and stood at the fireplace. Take your time, he said. Her mother's handwriting was neat and deliberate, the handwriting of a woman who had been a school teacher for 30 years and who believed that legibility was a form of respect for the reader. The letter was 4 pages. Eleanor Marsh, her mother, who had died in 1989, had come to Harrow Point in the summer of 1959 because of a commission. The local historical society had hired her to paint a record of the village as it existed before a planned harbor expansion would change it permanently. She had spent 3 summers doing it. During those summers, she had discovered something the historical society had not expected her to find. The 3 buildings in the harbor painting, the ones Eleanor did not recognize, had been a cannery, a workers' dormitory, and a community meeting hall, all built in 1891 by a cooperative of local fishing families. The cooperative had owned the land communally, the first such arrangement in the county. In 1963, a development company had acquired the land through what Eleanor's mother described carefully, in her schoolteacher's handwriting, as a process that several members of the Historical Society later told me they had reservations about, though they did not say so publicly at the time. The buildings had been demolished. The workers' history had been quietly buried. Eleanor's mother had documented all of it. In the paintings, in a written record she had deposited with a lawyer in Ellsworth, and in this letter, she had bought the cottage on Harrow Point in 1963 with money she had saved for 20 years, specifically to have a place to keep the records safe. She had put it in Eleanor's name. I put it in your name, the letter said, because I didn't trust it with anyone else. I didn't tell you because you were 18, and I didn't want to burden you with something I hadn't finished documenting. I meant to tell you when I was done, and then I wasn't done. And the years went, and I kept meaning to. The cottage is yours, Eleanor. It has been yours since 1963. The deed is with the Ellsworth lawyer. His son still runs the firm. The paintings are the historical record. The letter tells the rest. I should have told you decades ago. I'm sorry for the waiting. Your mother Sage pressed his muzzle against Eleanor's hand when she stopped turning the pages. She felt the warmth of his breath, the slight dampness of his nose. He did not move away. Eleanor sat at the wooden table in the cottage that had been hers for 61 years without her knowing it, and she thought about her mother, who had been a quiet woman, a careful woman, a woman who loved precisely and expressed it obliquely, through actions rather than declarations. She thought about the painting above the fireplace. Her mother had painted it, signed it with her initials, and left it there. Not hidden, right above the fireplace, the first thing you saw when you walked in, a marker, a signature. I was here. This was mine. This is yours, she thought about Arthur's notebook. Harrow Point. Ask E someday. I never did. Arthur had known something. Had known enough to write the name down, to mean to ask someone. He had never told Eleanor either. The two people she had trusted most had each, separately, kept this from her, not out of deception, she understood now, but out of the particular kind of love that means, I will handle this, I don't want you to carry it yet. She had spent 61 years not knowing she had a place on the coast of Maine that was hers. She had spent 11 weeks sleeping in a grage room in her daughter's house. The first tear surprised her. The second one didn't. Sage got up from her foot and came around the chair, pressing his flank against her back, the full warm length of him, and stayed there. Eleanor leaned back into him slightly. His breathing was slow and even. The sea outside was not slow and not even, but it was constant, which was almost the same thing. She should have told me, Eleanor said, to the room, or to Sage, or to her mother who was not there. But she did what she could. Sage pressed against her back and made no sound. When she turned to look at him, his dark eyes were on her face, steady as the stone walls. The second document in the envelope, behind the letter, was a copy of the deed. The original, the letter had said, was with the Ellsworth law firm. Eleanor read the copy carefully. The cottage and its land, the cliff, the path, the small outbuilding behind, had been transferred to Eleanor Ann Marsh in 1963. Her mother's name was the grantor. Hers was the grantee. The transfer was complete, unconditional, and had been properly recorded with the county. Carol had sold the Portland house. She had managed the estate account. She had handled everything, as she said, efficiently. She had not known about the cottage. The cottage had never been in the estate. It had been in Eleanor's name alone since 1963, overlooked because Eleanor herself had not known it existed. Carol could not touch this. The development company that had bought the harbor land in 1963 could not touch this either. What was done 60 years ago, and Eleanor's mother's documentation of it would not undo history, but it would be seen. The Historical Society, the regional archives, the university that had been asking for decades about the cooperative. They could all see it now. Eleanor folded the deed copy carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. Sage walked a slow circuit of the main room, fireplace, bookshelves, door, window, back to Eleanor, and then lay down at her feet and exhaled. His tail moved once, deliberate and easy. Bernard, still at the fireplace, said, "There's a kettle in the back cupboard. I've been keeping it filled on the chance." Eleanor looked at him. 61 years, he said. I thought someone ought to be ready. The winter light was going by the time Eleanor and Bernard had finished their tea. The sea below the cliff had turned from gray to the deep blue black of early evening, and the sound of it had changed, lower, more deliberate, like something settling in for the night. Eleanor stood at the cottage door and looked at the climbing rose that covered the sign above it, woody and thorned and leafless in November, but the canes were alive. She could see it in the color of them, the particular dark green under the bark. Come May, it would flower. It would have been flowering every May since her mother planted it. Her mother had painted this place, had bought it and put Eleanor's name on it, and planted a rose and hung a painting above the fireplace, and then waited for 30 years until she died, for Eleanor to come and find it. She had done all of this quietly and had said nothing, because she was a woman who showed love by building things, not by talking about them. Eleanor understood this because she was the same kind of woman. She took out her phone and called the Ellsworth law firm. A man answered, third generation, the name unchanged. He confirmed without surprise that they held a deed in Eleanor Voss's name, née Marsh. He said the file had a note on it. Call when she comes. I'm here, Eleanor said. We've been expecting you, he said. Your mother left instructions. Sage was sitting at the cliff edge, looking out at the darkening sea. His ears were relaxed, angled back. The wind moved through his thick outer coat, and he did not shift. He looked like something that had always been there, like the stone, like the cottage, like the rose. Settled. Done. Bernard stood beside Eleanor. Will you keep it, he said. Yes, she said. She hadn't thought about it. She didn't need to, hidden for 61 years. That was what the county records said, and they were right as far as they went. The cottage had been hidden from Eleanor. The history had been hidden from Harrow Point. The letter had been hidden in the frame of a painting that hung openly above the fireplace, waiting for someone to look closely enough to find what was behind it. Sage had known. He had pressed his nose to the attic door within 5 minutes of arrival and had not left it. Had scratched at it twice with his right paw, deliberate and clear, and had pressed his weight against the backing board of the frame while Eleanor worked it free. Without him, she might have spent an hour in the cottage and left. Without him, the attic might have stayed locked another 61 years. Some things are hidden not to be forgotten, but to be found by the right hands at the right time. Eleanor Voss, née Marsh, was 78 years old. She had a cliff cottage in her name, a mother's letter in her pocket, and a German shepherd sitting at the edge of the world looking out at the sea. It was, she thought, enough. It was more than enough.